Yo, what's happening people, and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be breaking down a Spanish inspired melody loop that I recently made and showing you the best instruments and effects that you can use to recreate these types of melodies for yourself. If you're new to the channel, then do me a favor and turn that subscribe button grey and click the bell next to it too, so you can be the first to know when I've uploaded new content. Now with all that said, let's jump straight into it. Now I know you've probably heard this a million times in a million different videos, but when you're making these types of melodies, the most important thing to take into consideration is sound selection. These types of melodies rely heavily on realistic sounds like pianos and guitars, as well as band instruments like strings and brass. So having some high quality VSTs at your disposal is going to be extremely helpful. You can get away with using stock and free VSTs, however it's going to take a lot more processing to get to that super realistic sound, which is definitely what we're going to need for these types of melodies. If you're on a higher budget, then you should definitely be looking towards Contact and some of the libraries that can be found inside of it. And for those of you on a lower budget, a good place to start is with the free versions of the Ample guitars. Expand 2 is good for some of those band sounds I was talking about, like brass and strings. And of course, Labs by Spitfire Audio is a really high quality VST, and that one's absolutely free. So I started this loop off in C# minor, and I've got my BPM set to 126. The first layer I put down was a guitar, and for this I went to the Session Guitarist Pick Nylon library. Next I chose a chord progression that sounded nice and melodic, and I chose to go for this chord progression. So I started out on C# minor, which is the first chord in the C# minor scale. I then went to the 5, which is G# minor, and then finally came down to the 4, which is F# minor. I then just extended these chords by finding some other notes in the scale that sounded good. Then the last thing I did was figured out an arpeggiated pattern that sounded good to me and added some rhythm to the chord progression. I'll quickly just play this for you before I go into the effects that I used on this layer. To this then I just added an EQ8 that's cutting out some of the low frequencies. I then had this going into a Pro Q3 so I could do some more precise cuts, and I'm just boosting some of the high frequencies a little bit. The next thing I added was guitar rig, and I used my go-to preset, which is vocal space. This is then going into an instance of wider, and I'm just using this to push that guitar out to the sides a little bit. And the last thing I added was soothe 2, and this is just going to control some of those more resonant mid and high frequencies. And once all those effects have been added, my guitar layer now sounds like this. After this, I wanted to add a more pad-like guitar sound, so I copied the pattern down from the first layer, and this time I'm using Session Guitarist Picked Acoustic. To make this guitar sound more like a pad, I added quite a few effects to it, and here's what I added. I've got my EQ8, which is rolling off a lot of the low and lower mid frequencies. Again, this is going straight into guitar rig, however this time I'm using the vocal glue preset. Now to slow this down a bit and make it sound a bit more stretched out, I'm using halftime, and I've got my loop function set to 1/4. And I've got this knob here set to sustain at 90 milliseconds. After that I added some chorus, and for this I went with the Tricera Chorus plugin. I'm using the vibrato preset, and I've got my chorus mixed down at 13%. Now this chorus plugin added some unwanted muddy sounds in the lower frequencies, so I'm just using a low shelf to cut those out. I then just found a frequency up here that I didn't like, so again I'm cutting that and I'm boosting the highs a little bit. Then lastly, I'm using Ableton's glue compressor just to squash it all together. Once all those effects have been added, this second guitar layer is sitting really nice in the background, and it complements my first layer well, and it sounds like this. Next I wanted to add a top line with a piano, and for this I went to the Oliver Arnold's Composer Toolkit and chose the Felt Grand Piano. To make this pattern I just made sure that my scale highlighting was turned on, and I just pretty much went through and found some notes that I like the sound of. You'll also notice that I've took some of these notes off the grid a little bit, and this is just going to add that humanized feel. I've kept the effects on this one quite simple. I've just got an EQ8 that's cutting out some of the low end and high end. Then to make it sound a bit less thin, I've gone with Valhalla Vintage Verb. I'm just using the stock preset and I've got it at 64%. So this is how the top melody sounds. Now, a lot of the sounds that I've added so far are in the mid and higher frequencies, so I wanted to introduce a bit of low end to it. The first thing I added for this was the LA Custom Wash preset from Keyscape. Then looking at the pattern, you'll see that I'm just following the root notes from the chord progression, and I've just got these playing down in the lower octaves. So for the effects on this, I've got an EQ that's just cutting out some of the muddy low frequencies, and it's cutting out a lot of the highs because that's where the guitar is going to be sitting. To make it sound a bit thicker, again, I'm going for wider, and I've got the setting on 50%. Next up, I'm using Arturia's Tape Mellow-Fi, and I'm using the subtle width preset. I think I actually prefer this plugin now to RC20 for adding that sort of analog color. I just feel like the sound it produces is a lot more warm and vintage. I then just copied this pattern onto a new layer to add a bass guitar, and for this I'm using Scarby's Rickenbacker bass. On this I've just got an EQ that's doing quite a harsh cut at around the 100 Hz region. This is then going into an instance of FabFilter Saturn 2, and I'm using the Warm Tube bass preset. A glue compressor with some really fast attack and release settings. Then this is going into guitar rig. Again, I'm using the vocal space preset. And lastly, I'm using FabFilter Pro Q, and I've just got a very subtle cut around the 90 Hz mark. Now with my piano and my bass layered together, they sound like this. And the last thing that I added to this loop was a vocal layer. For this layer, I went for vocalize inside of Contact, but I've just flattened it down to audio because I think the effects sound a lot better on audio waves than they do on the MIDI. So on this, I'm using the RAM reverb, and I've got everything set to default apart from the size. I've just turned that down to 30%. I'm then using wider to really push this vocal out to the side, so I've got this set to 200%. And then again, just to manage some of those more resonant frequencies, I've got an instance of Soothe 2. So yeah, that's all the melodic elements I added to this loop. Now I'm just going to quickly go over the effects that I've got on the main melody group. First up, I'm using RC20 with the Vinyl 3 preset, and as always, I've got this noise module turned off, and I've just turned the distort module down a bit. Lastly, I'm using the Waves pitch shifter, and I'm using this to just shift the melody down by 4 semitones. This is going to bring the final loop down from C sharp minor to A minor. And yeah, this is how the full melody sounds. That is going to bring us to the end of today's video. Make sure to let me know in the comments how you think the final loop sounds and what kind of beat you think this loop would fit into. If this is your first time on the channel, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell next to it too, so you can be the first to know when I've uploaded new videos. And of course, if you found this video useful, then make sure to smash the thumbs up button before you leave. Massive shout out to anybody that made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.